So I fire in the soda kiln to about cone 9.5, which is what I've discovered is about the best temperature for my particular clay body, which is the B clay from Continental Clay in Minneapolis. The thing I love about the B clay is it acts as a natural flashing slip and naturally blushes these nice rusty, golden, orangey colors on the clay without actually having to spray or add a slip to it. So that helps a lot in consideration for doing the surface work that I want to do on the pot, not having to deal with another layer of slip on there. I fire to cone 9.5 with a body reduction at cone 010, and I usually just do a light reduction in the small kiln, which I'm firing this week, because that particular kiln doesn't need a heavy reduction, just the indicators that I get from the peep, which is the little licking of the flame out of the bottom peep. I don't really need a strong pulsing of the flame out of that peep. Our other kiln that we fire, we have a larger soda kiln. That one I need a substantially stronger indicator for the reduction. So I don't know why, that's just the way it is with this particular kiln. So I do a body reduction at cone 010 for about 45 minutes to an hour, and you'll see the light licking of flame out of the bottom peep, and you can see farther in, and you can see a little bit of a turbulence behind there. And so that's a good indicator of a continuing reduction atmosphere. And then as I pull it out of reduction for the rest of the firing, I'm looking for a little bit of that turbulence to continue inside the peep, but I don't really need much of that pulsing outside of the bottom peep. And so I continue the neutral atmosphere until the end of the firing. At about cone 8, as cone 8 is starting to go down, I introduce the soda, and I do about 3 rounds of the soda introduction until about a half hour before I turn the kiln off. I give it a little soak at the end, so these glazes, which as you can see are very reactive, I get lots of different effects on these glazes, and so I can give the glazes a little chance to settle down so they don't foam or bubble or blister on the pots. So giving it a little soak at the end really helps. For those of you who are not really familiar with soda firing, what we do in the soda firing is introduce soda at the end of the firing. So soda is a very volatile material, and especially at high temperatures, it volatilizes, moves around through the kiln, kind of like currents in a stream, and it acts as a natural glaze. So it actually fluxes everything in the kiln. So the clay body, the glazes, the kiln furniture, the walls of the kiln, everything gets fluxed. It moves around in the kiln and acts as kind of a natural glaze. It also does the flashing on the clay body. So as you can see, these, I have to put every pot on wads which resist the soda. So without soda firing, this would be the natural clay color, but the soda flashes the clay into this kind of a toasty brown color. So it can flash color anywhere from this to a toasty brown to even sometimes a kind of a gray glassy surface, not unlike salt firing. In soda firing, you introduce soda into the kiln either as sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, or soda ash, or a combination of the two. Sometimes people just spray soda ash into the kiln in a solution, or sometimes people introduce a combination of soda ash and baking soda into the kiln, which is what I'm going to do today. So today I am loading the soda kiln. That's our small soda kiln. It has 2 12 by 24 shelves, and it's about 40 inches high. And I fit generally about 100 pots plus or minus in the kiln, depending on how large my work is. Today I'm also firing the work of a good friend, Don Macarios, and 2 young people who I have been mentoring this summer, James and Antonia. Before we load the pots into the kiln, we need to wad them with, it's kind of like a clay, but it also contains a lot of alumina in the wadding. So you can roll it up like clay balls, but the alumina actually resists the effects of the soda. So in order to keep the pots from sticking to the kiln when the soda is introduced, since the soda acts like a flux and glazes everything together, we need to put the wads on the pots so we can take them off the shelf without having them stick to the shelf. We generally use silicon carbide shelves. We also can use the advancer shelves in the soda kiln. The silicon carbide shelves are really good and sturdy, and they work great for me in this little kiln. And what we do have to do is also wad the posts above and below the shelves to keep them from sticking. This kiln is fired with forced air burners, which means I do have to control the air intake and the gas intake. It gives me a really extreme amount of control. Generally, this kiln takes about 16 hours to fire. The reduction cycle takes place about halfway through the firing. So it's a long day, but it's worth it. In the cooling cycle, I often leave the damper open a little bit through the cooling cycle, especially through the temperatures of crystal formation, because in the hard brick kiln, it actually cools so slowly that it almost over crystallizes as it's cooling. So I sometimes pinch the damper open a couple inches through the cooling cycle, which is from about 1950 to 1550 Fahrenheit. So I use a standard pyrometer and monitor that for the rate of climb and actually sometimes the rate of cooling, depending on how quickly I need to get into the kiln. I fired this kiln probably 80 times or more, so I have a pretty good idea of what spots in the kiln work best. And what I have worked out is some glazes that fire a little bit cooler, and I put those back by the flue. The back of the kiln is always cooler for some reason. And I have a couple of really juicy spots in the front kiln on the second shelf that's consistently extra juicy. So most of my glazed work does not do well there, although I have a couple of glazes that do really well there. So I save a couple special pieces for the juicy spots in the kiln. The top of the kiln generally is a little bit hot and juicy, so that works out pretty well for some of my big jars and things that seem to end up at the top of the kiln. I really enjoy firing work with several other potters' work included in the kiln. It's just a fun little community thing that we can do here, and unload the kiln together, load the kiln together, and talk about the work and process our ideas, and it works out really well because we have work of different sizes and shapes, and it's nice to have a good variety of that kind of work in the kiln.